The heavy, leather-bound book hit the wall an inch from my ear. The smell of old paper and dust exploded into my lungs. My advisor, Dr. Sterling, didn't apologize. He just leaned back and smiled. I had exactly 48 hours before my visa expired, and the government forced me on a plane. And the only man who could sign my papers was currently watching a live stream of my own private photos on a monitor I wasn't supposed to see. He told me I had 20 minutes to finish my defense, or he'd hit send to the entire university. But there was something Sterling didn't know as he lunged across the desk to grab my throat. He thought he was the predator, but I had turned my entire thesis into a trap designed to make him confess every single thing he's done to us. My finger was already hovering over the upload button. Let me take you back to the moment I stepped into room 402. The adhesive of the digital recorder bit into the skin of Sarah Miller's inner thigh as she smoothed her skirt. Each step toward room 402 echoed against the sterile linoleum, a rhythmic ticking clock marking the 48 hours left on her legal right to breathe this city's air. The scent of industrial bleach stung her nostrils, masking the underlying musk of old paper and stale coffee permeating the faculty wing. Sarah paused at the threshold, her fingers trembling as she reached into her pocket. She felt the small, cold plastic of the device. With a practiced, silent motion, she clicked the toggle. A tiny vibration, barely a hum against her thumb, confirmed it was live. She wasn't just walking into a thesis defense. She was walking into a cage she had spent 3 years building for herself. Her visa status sat in a government database like a ticking bomb, and Dr. Robert Sterling held the only deactivation code. She took a breath, the air tasting of floor wax and fear, and logged a silent apology in her mind. I am sorry for the noise my heart is making. I am sorry for taking up the oxygen in this hallway. She straightened her blazer, adjusted the strap of her backpack until the nylon dug into her shoulder, and pushed open the heavy oak door. Inside, the room was a vacuum of warmth. Dr. Robert Sterling sat bathed in the clinical glow of a desk lamp, his fingers dancing across a keyboard with practiced indifference. He didn't invite her in. He simply waited, his silence a physical weight in the cramped office. To his left sat Dr. Michael Davis, a man who usually looked like he was apologizing for his own existence, and Dr. Amy Jenkins, who remained a shadow in a gray cardigan. "You're late, Sarah," Sterling said, though the clock on the wall showed she was 3 minutes early. He didn't look up. He was busy counting. His silver pen tapped against the mahogany desk in a frantic, rhythmic pulse. 1, 2, 3, 4. He paused, his eyes darting to the ceiling tiles. He was mapping the geometry of his kingdom. "I apologize, Dr. Sterling. I'll ensure the lost time is added to the back end of the session," Sarah whispered. She moved toward the projector, but before she could set her bag down, a blur of leather and paper whistled through the air. The heavy, leather-bound volume of the university charter struck the wall inches from Sarah's temple. The thud was visceral, a bone-deep vibration that rattled the framed diplomas on the wall. Dust motes danced in the wake of the impact. Sarah didn't scream. She simply froze, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The smell of old glue and decaying parchment wafted from the fallen book. "Gravity is a constant, Sarah. Much like your inability to follow simple instructions regarding the filing of your preliminary data," Sterling said, his voice a smooth, terrifying silk. He finally looked at her, his eyes cold and unblinking. He stood up, his tall frame casting a long, jagged shadow across the linoleum. He didn't look like a scholar. He looked like a predator who had forgotten to hide his teeth. Michael Davis flinched, his hand instinctively going to his wallet to touch the scrap of paper he kept there. But he said nothing. He simply smoothed his tie 3 times, once for his father, once for his career, once for the lie he was about to live. Sarah looked at the book on the floor. The spine was cracked. She felt a phantom pain in her own back, as if the blow had connected. She realized then that the recording in her pocket was no longer a safety net. It was a suicide note if she failed to make him talk. "Pick it up," Sterling commanded. "And let's see if your intellect is as sturdy as your skull." Sarah knelt, her knees popping in the silence. She felt the rough grain of the carpet through her stockings. As she rose, she didn't look at Sterling's face. She looked at the ceiling tiles, counting them just as he did, trying to find a pattern in the chaos. She had to begin. She had to be perfect. If she wasn't perfect, the world would end in 48 hours. She moved to the front of the room, her movements mechanical and precise. She opened her laptop, the hum of the cooling fan sounding like a jet engine in the oppressive quiet. "If the committee is ready," she began, her voice gaining a fragile strength, "I would like to present the final validation of the neural mapping sequences. I have adjusted the margin of error to 0.02%, as requested in our last session." She navigated the slides with surgical precision. Each graph was a testament to 1,000 hours of unpaid labor. Each data point a drop of blood she had spilled to stay in this country. She didn't look at the faculty. She looked at the data. It was the only thing that couldn't lie to her. "Note the correlation between the stimulus and the response in Figure 4, Sarah directed, her laser pointer steady despite the tremor in her hand. "The peaks represent a direct causal link that Dr. Sterling and I discussed in October." "Doctor?" "Sterling, you noted then that the integrity of this specific set was unassailable, I believe was the word." She held her breath. This was the first trap. She was forcing him to claim the work, to put his stamp of approval on the very data he had threatened to call fraudulent in private. Sterling leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning. He tapped his pen against his chin, his eyes tracking a fly buzzing near the window. "It is a robust set, Sarah. I recall our late-night audits. The work shows a certain intimacy with the subject matter that only my guidance could have fostered. Yes, the data stands. It is, as I said, mine." A small spark of victory flickered in Sarah's chest. He had said it. He had validated the research in front of witnesses. The recording would capture the admission. She felt her shoulders drop a fraction of an inch. She looked toward Michael Davis, expecting a nod of encouragement. After all, Michael had been the one to whisper to her in the hallway that she was brilliant. He was the one who knew what Sterling was. Subverted. Phase 1. Smart decision. Sarah shifted her gaze to Michael Davis. This was the moment she had planned for. Michael was the key. He was the junior faculty member who had seen the bruises on her spirit, if not her skin. He had shared coffee with her in the basement break room, speaking in hushed tones about changing the culture of the department. Sarah had purposely structured this part of the defense to allow Michael a window to intervene, to provide the peer-reviewed backup that would cement her findings as independent and original. She had even hidden a secondary set of logs in a shared folder they both accessed, a breadcrumb trail of her solo work. Michael was a good man, trapped in a bad system, and she was giving him the ladder to climb out with her. Phase 2. False positive. Michael cleared his throat and leaned forward, a small, supportive smile playing on his lips. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the committee. I've actually had the privilege of overseeing some of the raw input for this phase, Michael said, his voice steady. The methodology is flawless. Sarah felt a rush of pure, unadulterated relief. It was working. The tension that had been a physical knot in her stomach for months began to unravel. She saw Dr. Jenkins make a note on her legal pad, and even the dean, watching via the remote link, seemed to nod. Michael was standing up for her. He was going to be the witness she needed. Phase 3. The crack. But as Michael continued, his hand didn't move toward his laptop to show the shared logs. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver flash drive. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked at Sterling. The smile on his face didn't change, but it suddenly felt like a mask that had been glued on too tight. He smoothed his tie 3 times. 1, 2, 3. A cold prickle of unease danced down Sarah's spine. Why was he looking at Robert for permission to speak? Phase 4. Catastrophic reveal. However, Michael said, the word hitting the room like a gunshot. While the data is robust, we must be honest about its origin. Dr. Sterling's mentorship is the only reason this project didn't collapse under the weight of Sarah's technical inconsistencies. In fact, Robert, I was reviewing the logs you sent me this morning, the ones Sarah apparently forgot to include in her final draft. And they prove that the core algorithm was your design from 3 years ago. The world tilted. Sarah felt the floor beneath her feet turn into water. Michael pushed the flash drive across the table toward Sterling. I wanted to make sure the committee knew just how much of a father figure you've been to this project, Robert. Without your intellectual property, Sarah would just be a student with a backpack and a dream. I've prepared a supplemental report that credits the foundational breakthrough entirely to the Sterling lab, not the individual student. Sterling beamed, a fatherly, predatory warmth radiating from him. Thank you, Michael. Loyalty to the truth is the highest academic calling. Sarah realized with a sickening jolt that Michael wasn't her ally. He was Sterling's creature. He had traded her career for his own tenure. The shared folder had been a trap to see what evidence she was gathering. By helping her, he had mapped her every move. Now, he hadn't just remained silent. He had actively handed Sterling the weapon to strip her of her authorship. She wasn't just losing her thesis. She was being erased in real time. The clock is ticking, Sarah, Sterling said, gesturing to the wall. You have 20 minutes left before this committee reaches a verdict. I suggest you stop gawking and finish your performance. The numbers on the digital clock above the door bled red. 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, the sun would set on her life in America. Sarah felt the weight of the digital recorder against her thigh. It felt like a lead weight now. She had the admission of the data's validity, but Michael had just neutralized it by handing the ownership to Sterling. 20 minutes, Sarah repeated, her voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Yes, Sterling said, leaning forward. He was close enough now that she could smell his expensive cologne. Sandalwood and something sharp, like ozone before a storm. And we have so much more to discuss. For instance, the qualitative aspects of your residency. The way you handle power dynamics when the lights go out. He began to use words that had no place in an academic defense. He spoke of submission to the hierarchy and the necessity of total transparency between a master and his subject. To the other faculty, it sounded like dense philosophical jargon about institutional structure. To Sarah, it was a play-by-play of the nights in his office, when he had forced her to stay late. The nights he had taken the photographs that now sat on his hard drive like a loaded gun. Sometimes, Sterling continued, his eyes locked on hers. A student must be willing to expose everything to prove they belong in the inner circle. Wouldn't you agree, Sarah? The camera doesn't lie even when the student tries to. The room grew dim. Sarah looked up, realizing the overhead lights were failing. One of the fluorescent tubes began to flicker, a rhythmic, strobe-like pulse that made Sterling's movements look jerky and inhuman. Flash, dark, flash, dark. It felt like the shutter of a camera. In the corner of the room, a heavy metal filing cabinet groaned. Without anyone touching it, the top drawer slid open, the rollers shrieking like a wounded animal. Sarah's eyes darted toward the sound. There, nestled among the manila folders, was a black lens. A small red light pulsed, a heartbeat of surveillance. The air in room 402 thickened with the scent of scorched dust. Sarah felt a wave of nausea. He wasn't even hiding it anymore. He was showing her the cage while the judges watched, convinced they were seeing a masterpiece. "Your posture is sagging, Sarah," Sterling said. He stood up and walked around the table. Before she could move, he was behind her. His hand clamped onto her shoulder, his thumb digging into the collarbone with bruising force. "A representative of this university must stand tall. Let me help you." His touch was cold, even through the fabric of her blazer. He leaned down, his breath hot against her ear. "If you scream, I'll hit upload on the department server before you hit the floor. Keep talking about the graphs, Sarah. Be a good girl." Sarah's vision blurred. She felt the familiar urge to apologize, to say sorry for being a victim, sorry for being weak. But then she felt the hard plastic of the recorder against her leg. She remembered the 4,312 apologies in her log. She thought of her mother's voice, telling her that a bee would kill her father. No, she thought. The bee didn't kill him. Silence did. She shoved Sterling back. It wasn't a graceful move. It was a desperate, panicked lunge. Her elbow caught him in the ribs, and he grunted, stumbling back against the whiteboard. The screech of his markers falling to the floor was like a volley of tiny stones. "Don't touch me," she gasped, her voice raw. The committee stared. Dr. Jenkins's pen paused midair. Michael Davis looked at the floor, his face flushing a deep, guilty red. "I apologize for the outburst," Sarah said, her voice shaking but loud. "I am experiencing a reaction to the environmental stressors of this room." She turned back to the monitor, but the screen had changed. The graphs of her neural mapping were gone. In their place was a secondary window, one that only she could see from her position at the podium. It was a live stream. A grainy, high-contrast video feed of a girl in a lab coat, Sarah, sitting at a desk while a shadow loomed over her. The shadow's hand was moving beneath the desk. It was the blackmail footage. He was playing it for her, a private cinema of her own trauma, while the faculty waited for her to explain the next slide. "Is there a problem, Sarah?" Sterling asked, straightening his tie. He was smiling now, a genuine, terrifying expression of joy. He had her. He had her in the strobe light, in the dark, in the digital net. Sarah looked at the screen. She looked at the red light in the filing cabinet. She realized the university cloud wasn't just a storage space, it was a weapon. If he could stream to this monitor, she could stream to his. Subverted Phase 1. Smart decision. Sarah's mind raced with the cold, crystalline logic of a cornered engineer. The departmental laptop was her only bridge to the world outside this room. She knew the university's architecture. The cloud sync was a two-way street. If she could just trigger a manual override, she could bypass Sterling's local block and push her hidden audio recording directly into the dean's urgent review folder. It was a brilliant, technical solution. She didn't need to win the argument. She just needed to move the data. She began to type with her left hand, hidden by the podium, while her right hand feigned a search for a missing slide. She felt a surge of pride. She was outthinking him. She was a scientist, and the system was just a series of gates she could unlock. Phase 2. False positive. The progress bar appeared in a tiny, hidden window at the bottom of the screen. 10%, 40%, 80%. The upload was screaming through the fiber optic veins of the building. She saw the sync complete icon flash green. Relief, hot and dizzying, washed over her. It was done. The recording of Sterling's threats, his physical assault, his admissions of theft. It was all sitting on Dean Wilson's server. She just had to wait for him to open it. She looked at Sterling and felt a moment of pure, righteous triumph. She had won. The truth was out of her hands and in the system. Phase 3. The crack. Sarah waited for the sound of a phone ringing, for the dean to burst through the door. But the room remained silent, save for the hum of the flickering lights. She looked back at her laptop screen to close the hidden window, but the sync complete icon wasn't green anymore. It had turned a deep, bruised purple. A new window popped up, one she didn't recognize. It wasn't a university interface. It was a private administrative tool. Her stomach dropped as she saw the file name she had just uploaded change in real time. Audio_proof.mp3 was being rewritten. Phase 4. Catastrophic reveal. The screen flickered, and the projectors suddenly displayed the contents of the dean's folder for the whole committee to see. But it wasn't her recording. Sterling had anticipated this. He hadn't just blocked her. He had set a mirror trap. The file now displayed on the screen was a document titled Sarah_Miller_plagiarism_confession.pdf. Sarah watched, frozen, as the document opened. It was a perfectly forged letter, bearing her digital signature, detailing how she had fabricated her data and harassed Dr. Sterling in an attempt to secure a visa. The audio she had tried to upload had been intercepted and replaced by a preloaded confession, triggered by her own attempt to bypass the security. By trying to save herself, she had technically signed her own academic death warrant. "What is this, Sarah?" Sterling asked, his voice dripping with mock disappointment. He turned to the committee, his face a mask of tragedy. "I didn't want to bring this forward. I hoped she would come clean during the defense. But it seems she's tried to upload this confession to the dean's private server to bypass our departmental review." Michael Davis gasped, a sound of staged horror. Dr. Jenkins looked at the screen, her eyes narrowing. Sarah tried to speak, but her throat was a desert. She had provided the proof they needed to destroy her. The system hadn't protected her. It had been the hand that held the knife. "This is a grave matter," Sterling said, his voice booming now. "Plagiarism, fraud, and an attempt to manipulate the dean's office. I believe we have no choice. This defense is terminated. Mr. Davis, please call campus security. We need to begin the expulsion process and notify immigration immediately." The door to room 402 felt 1,000 miles away. The red clock hit 0. The sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallway. Sarah stood at the podium, her hands gripping the wood so hard her knuckles were white, bloodless stones. David Thompson, the security officer, entered the room. He was a wall of blue polyester and jingling keys, his posture rigid. He looked at the screen, then at Sarah, then at the smug, relaxed face of Robert Sterling. "Officer, please escort Ms. Miller to the holding area," Sterling said, checking his watch. "We have a lot of paperwork to process before the end of the business day." Sarah looked at David. She saw his mismatched socks, one navy, one black, peeking out from under his trousers. She remembered what Jennifer Garcia had told her about him. He followed an order once, and someone died. Now he only follows his luck. Sarah didn't move. She didn't cry. She felt a cold, sharp clarity settle over her. The apology log in her mind stopped ticking. For the first time in 24 years, she didn't feel sorry. She felt like a scientist observing a terminal specimen. "I won't be leaving," Sarah said. Her voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a scalpel. "Excuse me?" Sterling sneered. "The document on the screen is a forgery," Sarah said, turning to Dr. Jenkins and the camera linked to the dean. "And I can prove it, not through the file itself, but through the man who wrote it. You see, Dr. Sterling has a very specific pathology. He counts, he maps, he cannot help but leave a trail of his own obsession." She stepped away from the podium and walked toward Sterling. He flinched, his eyes darting to the ceiling. 1, 2, 3, 4. "You wrote that confession at 3:15 a.m. on Tuesday," Sarah said, her voice calm and analytical. "I know this because the metadata, which you were too arrogant to scrub from the administrative tool, matches the timestamp of the last tile count you performed in this office. You also referenced a study session on the 14th. Tell me, Robert, why would I confess to a session that never happened? Or should we talk about the session on the 15th? The one where you told me that my visa was worth exactly one favor?" Sterling's face contorted. The paternal mask shattered, revealing the small, frightened boy who had been locked in an attic 50 years ago. "You're delusional. You're a failing student grasping at straws." "Am I?" Sarah asked. She looked at Dr. Amy Jenkins. "Dr. Jenkins, you've been very quiet. You've been washing your hands every time you leave this room. Is it because you can smell the rot too?" Amy Jenkins stood up. She didn't look confused or passive anymore. She reached into her gray cardigan and pulled out a small, leather-bound ID wallet. "Actually, Sarah, I'm not just a faculty member. I'm a lead investigator for the Title IX office. And I've been recording this entire session on a dedicated, encrypted line that Dr. Sterling's administrative tools can't touch." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the flickering light seemed to hold its breath. "The dean has been listening to the live stream, Robert," Jenkins said, her voice like ice. "But not the one you sent him. The one I've been feeding him for the last hour. We saw the book you threw. We heard the coded threats. And we just saw you attempt to frame a student for a crime you committed." James Wilson's voice crackled over the room's speakers. It was heavy with the sound of a funeral dirge. "Robert, step away from the student. Officer Thompson, please take Dr. Sterling into custody. We'll be conducting a full forensic audit of his administrative tools immediately." Sterling lunged for the laptop, a final, violent attempt to delete the world. But David Thompson was faster. The security officer moved with the grace of a man who was done following the wrong rules. He pinned Sterling's arms behind his back, the metallic clack of handcuffs echoing like a gavel. "I have my luck today, Doc," David whispered as he led the struggling professor toward the door. Michael Davis sat frozen, his hand trembling as he reached for his wallet. Sarah walked over to him. She didn't say anything. She just took the silver flash drive from the table and dropped it into the trash can. "Milk, bread and forgiveness, Michael?" she asked softly. "You're going to need a lot more than a grocery list to fix this." The room cleared. The police took Sterling. The dean's office began the long process of unmaking a monster. Sarah sat alone in the Victorian chair in the center of the room. The scent of ozone and bleach was fading, replaced by the cool, evening air drifting in from the hallway. She pulled out her phone. She opened the apology log. Entry 4313. "I am sorry." She paused. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then, she did something she had never done before. She didn't type a description of the offense. She didn't note the cost of her existence. She deleted the app. Sarah Miller walked out of room 402 and into the American sunlight. The quad was empty, the sightless statues of the founders staring at nothing. She felt the weight of her backpack, but it didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a kit for a journey that was just beginning. She had 48 hours to finalize her visa, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't running out of time. She was simply moving forward. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of grass and freedom, and she didn't apologize to anyone for the space she took up in the world. The end.